Hello, boys and girls. As you can see, I'm in my green today for St. Patrick's Day. Yesterday, we left off with our book, Warton and the King of the Skies. I'm going to go back a little bit like I always do. Well, said Fulton, glad to be getting some attention. Have you all noticed the toads Fritz, Fred, Floyd, and I captured today? All eyes turned towards Warton and Warton, standing in the middle of the room. Of course we noticed, said the weasel next to Fulton, and I say, let's eat them now. Fulton turned and shoved him right out of his chair. Too bad you don't use your brain once in a while like I do, Frank, because then you'd have a much better idea. And just what is your wonderful idea? Said a weasel with hardly any hair on his tail. Fulton looked slowly around the table. Well, he said importantly, isn't it true that since the tree we live under blew over, we've needed a new home badly? Okay, that's true, grumbled Fred, especially when it rains. I'd give anything for a room of my own, said Fritz. Anyone as fat as you needs 2 rooms, snickered Floyd. At that, Fritz stamped down hard on Floyd's foot. Floyd let out a yow and started hopping around the table in agony while Fritz just laughed loudly. Fulton paid them no attention. And isn't it true, he said, that we've tried to build a new home many times? You know very well it's true, you big windbag, said a weasel with a pure white head. Good for you, Francis, chuckled the weasel next to him. Now ask him why we haven't done it yet. Before Fulton could say any more, there was a loud banging at the far end of the table. Frida, who had been hitting her mug against the table, stood up on her chair. Her cheeks bulged out with food. Her blue bow dangled loosely on one side of her head. I'll tell you why, Farley, and the rest of you too, she mumbled. It's because you're all uncivilized and you're unruly and... She paused a moment to take several huge swallows from her mug. Then, as rhubarb cider dribbled down her chin, she went on, You're all so disgusting. It makes me ashamed to admit that I'm your sister. Frida snatched another burger, sat down, and the quiet. Well, she's right about that, said Floyd. Yeah, it's the truth, said Farley. So what, said Fred, it's nothing new. I guess we'll never have a new home, said Frank. Fulton looked disdainfully at Frank and knocked him out of his chair again. Didn't I tell you I had a good idea? What is it? Gasped Frank from the floor. Fulton turned and pointed straight at Warton. When I saw that toad today, and what he was wearing, I knew it could mean only one thing. Warton suddenly realized he still had on his tool belt and carpenter's hat. And what that means, said Fulton proudly, is that toad must be some kind of construction expert. He can show us what to do, and we'll have a new home by tomorrow night. Suddenly, all the weasels grew greatly excited. They whistled and clapped and stamped their feet. Wait, shouted Floyd. What if even they can't help us? That's simple, said Fred. Then we'll have 2 more furs for our floor. Floyd put his nose directly against Fred's. And how, may I ask, does one get fur from a toad? Fred looked a bit embarrassed as he realized his mistake. Well, he said slowly, maybe we could make vests out of them? Well, now that's the first sensible thing you said all day today, said Floyd. Warton could keep quiet no longer. But I'm not a construction expert, he cried. And I'm not an assistant, spoke up Warton. Fulton and the other weasels laughed loudly. You can't fool us, said Fulton. So remember this. Tomorrow, you are to show us how to build a new home. If you don't, you'll never see your own home again. In the meantime, you can eat our food and you can sleep in the garbage and junk room. Frida got out of her chair and stood in front of Warton. And as long as you're an assistant, you can help me in my kitchen tomorrow. She whirled around and left the room. At once, again the weasels started shouting, pushing and wrestling among themselves. Warton and Morton looked helplessly at each other. "We're in terrible trouble," said Morton. "We must do something quickly." "I know," agreed Warton. The two toads decided to go to the room where Fulton said they could sleep. Perhaps there, where there was less commotion, they might think better about what to do. Warton was just entering the passageway when Morton shouted, "Wait!" He hopped to the long table, grabbed 2 burgers, and hurried back to Warton. "No matter what happens," he said as they went along the tunnel, "we must always remember to eat and keep up our strength." As soon as they stepped into the garbage and junk room, they began digging into the mess. When they were done, they had completely cleared a small place in one corner. Then they found an old crate to serve as a table, a broken stool, and a wooden bucket to sit on. After that, they each made a small bed out of old rags. Satisfied at last that it was as livable as they could make it, they ate the rat burgers, which neither toad cared for very much. Then they sat on the floor with their backs against the wall and tried to think about what to do next. As Warton stared at the ceiling and Morton stared at the floor, they could hear a constant commotion coming from the big room as the brawling weasels carried on their arguing and tumbling about. But in the garbage and junk room, not a sound was made. At last, Warton let out a long sigh. "I'm afraid I can think of no way to convince those weasels we are not what they think we are." Then Morton spoke. "Perhaps we shouldn't," he said. "After all, it's the only reason we are still alive." Warton blinked. "But then I would have to pretend to be a construction expert tomorrow, and you as my assistant." Morton nodded. But I'm not," cried Warton, and you're not." "I know," said Morton, with his face solemn. "But you have built many things, and with your ingenuity, I wouldn't be at all surprised if you could help those weasels. And from the looks of Frida's kitchen, I'm sure I can do whatever assisting she should ask for." Warton was aghast. But I don't even know how a construction expert should act." "Well, they act with authority," said Morton. "I'm sure of that, and they always take charge." "Take charge?" stammered Warton, as he thought of the 8 wild weasels brawling and shouting out in the big room. Then he looked at Morton. He gulped hard. "Very well," he said. "I know it's the only thing we can do. So tomorrow I'll do my best to act like a construction expert. And I will do my best to help Frida in her kitchen." Morton choked as he said it. By then it was late, and both toads were extremely tired. They curled up on their beds of rags and quickly went to sleep. That's all for today, boys and girls. I'll see you tomorrow as we continue our Warton and the King of the Skies. Have a great day today.